Hello, today's video looks at the context in J.B. Priestley's And Inspector Calls in the least amount of time for the maximum amount of gains. As you probably already know, I'm Zoe Sophie from Pass English GCSE. I'm an English teacher, tutor and English specialist. Starting first, J.B. Priestley, and make sure you spell his name right. I've seen lots of students spell it L-Y, it's spelled L-E-Y. Who was he? Born in 1894 in Bradford. He served in the army in the First World War, so he got direct experience of what happened at that time, and that influenced his writing greatly. He wrote novels. He started off with novels, and by 1932 he was writing plays as well and becoming very famous for his kind of progressive way of political thinking that was, emerging at the time but sort of stood out. He was, I suppose, like many writers, determined to educate his audience through what he wrote, and Inspector Calls is no exception. And if you didn't already know, you should know that he is socialist in his political leanings. So it would be equivalent of the Labour Party today, sort of left-leaning political thinker. 2. You need to know that although the play was written later, it's set in 1912, which is known as the Edwardian era. And in that era, there were strict behaviour conventions, so strict rules on how you would behave. For example, introductions. There were very strict etiquette around this. People were expected to introduce each other using titles. Even husbands and wives used terms of respect, Mr. and Mrs. to each other in the company of strangers. So strict protocols that should be adhered to, and as you probably know, because you've read the play, I hope, they don't stick to this. A lot of the characters break these rules. There were rules about conversation. It should be cool, collected and self-possessed. You should not be prying into each other's business. Again, the characters break this too with all the questioning. And you weren't supposed to sort of make a pretense of gentility, sort of being better than you are, or allude to false connections with the wealthy. Of course, Mr. Burling does this when he makes reference to Gerald about the impending knighthood, so he breaks that etiquette as well, breaches those rules, those social conventions. You're not supposed to use slang terms, and yet Sheila does. She tells her brother that he's squiffy. Again, characters going against these conventions that they're supposed to be holding themselves up to. And sexual conquest. You are not supposed to, it's even frowned on now, but nothing like what it was then. There should not be any references to gentlemen having succeeded with the lady sexually, and yet both Gerald and Eric do this. You need to have an appreciation for context of 1912 versus 1945. 1912 being the setting, the Edwardian era in which the characters live, 1945 being much later, a very different time, and when the play was written. So 1912, if you haven't already known, the play set just before the sinking of the Titanic, which is what makes the audience know that Mr. Burling's wrong when he says the Titanic's unsinkable, absolutely unsinkable. That dramatic irony there, that audience knowing something the character doesn't, helps us to prove he's wrong, and it's to do with when it's set. It's set in 1912, but it's written in 1945. So any audience viewing this is going to be 1945 onwards. They're going to know the Titanic did sink. It was very sinkable. It was a Liberal government set at the time, a little bit different to Conservatives and Labour. You have to read up on them. They were not as progressive towards working classes, nowhere near, not like Labour, okay? It was closer to the Conservatives, if you like, but they are known as the Liberal government, so not very kind to workers, really. Whereas 1945, you started to get, because of the war, by this time the Second World War's ended, you've got things like the United Nations, the UN Security Council, new bodies trying to come together to keep people safe, to try not to repeat the war. So very, very different time. Lots happened in between these years. You start to see the effects of a Labour government just comes in. Bank of England and the mines were nationalised. Nationalised means taken over by the government. So the government effectively are the bank, are the mines. And these policies are very much in line with the Labour government. Attlee was very different to Asquith. So you should have a rough idea of the sort of government that was in power at the time. And being Labour government, I said that Priestley himself, a socialist, this explains a lot of the morality within the play. So even though it's set in the Edwardian era, it's got the morality of a later time looking back at it. The patriarchy. I'm sure you've heard this word before. Patriarchy refers to sort of ruled by men, and in 1912 it was. You need to understand about the role of women. Generally speaking, they were subservient. Particularly lower class girls really had no power whatsoever. All women, were subservient to men. Well-off women could go and get married. All a poor woman could do really was be cheap labour. Anyone who got divorced, any women that got divorced would have been shunned out of society, ignored, condemned. You didn't really get a divorce. You put up with bad treatment or whatever the problem was. It just wasn't the done thing to be divorced. If you were working class like Ava Smith, like Edna the parlourmaid, you had to have a job. If you didn't work, you didn't eat. There was no safety net. There's no benefit system. There was nothing to help you. So you had to work. And if you lost your job, it was serious. It meant being out on the streets. It meant going hungry. Perception of women at the time was very different to now. Women were seen as being delicate, fragile, obedient to the husbands and fathers. Again, this idea of the patriarchy, sort of pater. If you learn French, mon père, father, this word refers to male leading the world, the family unit. Women were, below them in terms of power. No until marriage. What do I mean by that? Well, no sex until marriage. Okay, it wasn't done. That's what I mean. If you did that, you did it at your own risk, and you have children out of wedlock. That was really frowned upon. It was a bad move. It was a bad idea. Only for women though. Men could do what they wanted. Men could sleep around, but women, bad idea. And that's why someone like Ava Smith suffers as much as she does. And this idea of social mobility, marrying up, for example. So think about lower class people marrying middle class people. Guys could kind of do it. It wasn't great for them to marry down. They could certainly marry up. Mr. Burling does it. He marries Sybil. Sybil is a husband's social superior. It says that right at the start of the play. She's kind of upper middle class. He's middle class. He's a prosperous manufacturer. He can marry up. She can marry down, but it probably wasn't. I mean, they're probably quite close in terms of class relations, but really women didn't have the freedom to engage in social mobility like guys did. And a guy, Gerald Croft, upper class Gerald Croft, there's no way he would ever marry Ava Smith, a working class girl. And she knows that. She knows that when they start out. Not going to happen. So social mobility, not for women. So there's a lot of things guys can do. Women just couldn't. And if they did do them, the costs were high. Whereas by 1945, things are changing. We've had 2 wars by this point. We've had women, men have gone out to fight. Women are needed in the home. They're needed in munitions factories. They're needed to do things. So they've earned their place in society. And because they've done that, they're getting more rights. I said about the Liberal Party in 1912, Asquith, not pro-women's rights in terms of voting, but by 1945, we've got, legislation in place. It started off, women over 30 had the vote, and then it was extended to women over the age of 21, and it sort of gradually got better. Women got more of a voice. This is why if you hear about first wave feminists, this is where it really comes from. First wave feminism was about women getting the vote, women getting equality, okay, or parity with men. Last point really we need to focus on is the use of mystery plays and morality plays. And Inspector Calls is both. It's a mixture of both. So mystery plays. Think about the game Cluedo or detective thrillers. If you've read The Sign of 4, if you've read any detective fiction or sort of the whodunit genre, where you sort of someone's been murdered and it's a series of clues to find out who's done it. That's the kind of structure this play follows, although it's kind of more of a morality play. Ava Smith kills herself. She's not directly murdered, but it's got that structure about it. And the progressive revelations, the revealing little bit by little bit of new information piques that audience interest and maintains it throughout the play. So it's got that mystery play structure, but combined with that, it's got the morality play as well in it. These came from originally sort of the late Middle Ages, and they were didactic. That just means aimed to instruct or to teach. And they were didactic in nature. They were trying to get the audience to be good people, to be moral, to teach morality, hence the name. And they kind of link to the 7 deadly sins, and arguably when you read up on the context of Spectacles, you can see a lot of the characters engage in these. Sheila, pride, lust, Gerald, for example, maybe anger, wrath, could be Mrs. Burling, when Ava Smith uses her name, for example. Greed, Mr. Burling, sacking Ava for asking for more money. Arguably speaking, some, if not all of these, apply to the respective characters and their actions during the play. So to sum up then, In Spectacles is a socialist play. It's written in 1945 by a socialist with socialist leanings. Priestley's agenda is didactic in nature. He's trying to teach his audience to be more socialist, to be less focused on looking after themselves and much more into collectivism in a world where there are higher taxes, more sharing, more safety nets, where people are politically kinder. Even though it's written in 1945, it's set in 1912, the Edwardian era, where life was stricter, morality and social etiquette was seen in a different light to now, and that explains a lot of the views of the characters in the play. I've just mentioned it's a mixture of morality and mystery play in terms of its elements. And if you're looking at it now, it would be pro-Labour Party ideals, thinking about the working class, helping everybody, not just the people at the top. I hope that helps everyone. If you've got any questions, please feel free to visit my website or do have a look at my channel. I've got other videos all about Spectacles on here as well. Thank you.